Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm Lea Sellers and we're going to be talking about sustainability principles for every business. And this roundtable is sponsored by Cisco. I'm joined by Dax Grant, CEO of Global Transform, by Giles, Lindsay, who's CTO and business agility coach of Nimbler, and by Matt Mallett from the UK Space Agency. He's CDIO. Could I start with you, Dax? What are the sustainability principles you are most interested in for your business?
It's a very good question. In terms of sustainability, really, we're looking at broader principles rather than any one particular area at the moment. A lot of the focus of our business is around leadership behaviours, and a lot of that is around looking at how to combine both effective behaviours in terms of working to do the right thing, building that wider and broader societal view, but also realising that sustainability is not an either-or with commerciality. All of these things can be brought together. So that congruence of leadership is really where we're focusing in terms of key principle first.
Well, thank you for that. That's interesting. Congruence. Giles, could I ask you the same question?
Yeah.
The sustainability principles.
I agree with Dax. There's no sort of either or thing with sustainability, but for me, I've always thought of it as sort of the three pillars behind it. There's obviously environmental, there's obviously the social, which obviously is the people, the teams, and the leadership as well, but then there's also the governance, and the sort of, making sure that we are dealing with that sustainability properly.
And Matt, could I ask you the same thing? What are the sustainability principles in your view?
I think we both, Giles and Dax, have covered off the key ones. From our point of view, to build on those, I think for us it's very key to use satellite information to educate and provide data that can provide evidence of the damage that we've already done, the sustained damage we continue to do, and how we should be looking to address it and what's effective and what's not.
Okay, so those are the principles. How is it working in practice, Dax?
There's always more work to do in that area, isn't there? So my honest view is now we've got a connected world through digitisation. There's a huge opportunity to bring folks together under the whole sustainability agenda. How we do that, as we all know, once you add people into a conversation, it takes longer. And it's really about how globally and locally we start to build those sustainable teams and create self-organising groups as well within the commercial world, but also bringing together the government and key stakeholders across the world so that we start to focus on fewer, better things and get into very defined action plans with goals.
And who is responsible for sustainability? I mean, obviously it starts at the top, but then who else?
I don't know anyone that isn't really. So we've all got a role and responsibility. And personally, I'm most educated by my children who come home with the best sustainability principles in the world, and they're very practical as well. So I do believe if you start with the next generation, they will grow. But we, as a community and as leaders in society, have that responsibility both day to day in terms of immediate action, but also the onus to look on the medium to long term.
Thank you. And Giles, what about you? How do you put those principles of ESG into action?
We're scratching the surface. I think, there's a long way to go. Small company I'm at the moment, and it's trying to do its best. It's trying to do its carbon footprint tracking as well, trying to understand, where that spend is coming from. We're even looking at it. We had a conversation earlier about hybrid and cloud, and even in that space, we're looking to work with partners who, have sustainability as one of their core tenets as well. So we're only at the start of this journey on the sustainability piece, trying to understand, how we're going to go about doing this. The thing is, though, as Dax said, the responsibility is across the entire organisation. It's not just the CEOs or the CFOs' responsibility, neither just mine. This is something which goes right the way across the whole organisation.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, isn't it? Including everybody. And Matt, would you say the same, putting those principles into practice?
From our perspective, it's one of our strategic principles. So everyone within the organisation signed up to it. It's a massive area. It's challenging for all of us, but because of who we are, we're trying to drive it through our third-party supply chain as well, and influence our supply chain to be more sustainable in their approaches, and award business based on more sustainable solutions. But it's a long journey. We're not naive to that.
Who is responsible in your organisation, apart from you? How do you engage employees? Or do you find they're easily engaged?
So everyone's...
In your business, in space, maybe they are.
Yes.
So do you get pressure bottom up? You talked about your children and employees. Do you find it easy to engage employees in sustainability principles?
Yeah, I think it's, as I said, small business. Everybody is more conscious about it. Everybody wants to do their part. I've got to say, ever since this has become a thing in the workplace, there's not been resistance to it. It's not like there's some sort of, new change happening. So for me, I think it's easy. It's an easy conversation. Everybody wants to do their part in improving, something that's either, as I said earlier, environmental, social amongst themselves, or in terms of something that actually has an impact for the business.
It's an easy conversation, but what about, what are the challenges, if you like, of implementing sustainability policies?
Sometimes there's cost involved with it as well. And so sometimes you've got to suddenly sort of weigh up that inherent cost of doing something that's sustainable over and above actually trying to obviously impact the bottom line of the organisation as well. So, there's a trade-off, shall we say. But for us, it's just this learning curve. It's quite a steep learning curve for us as well. But it's one that I think everybody is actually quite happily taking.
Can you tell us any specifics, any of you really, about what you're implementing in sustainability terms?
So I'm happy to jump in. We're looking at how we can reclaim the satellites in space, and any large pieces of debris that are presently floating in the vacuum of space, circulating the Earth. So for us, that's a big one. Is about reducing the amount of debris that's in space at the present time, because there's over 1 million items over a centimetre in space, over a million items 1 centimetre in size floating in space at the moment, between 8 and 25,000 kilometres per hour.
The thing is, it's so cool talking about space stuff. We could just talk about that, couldn't we, all the time? The debris, I'm really pleased to hear it. And you're using, obviously, technology to get there. Dax, you were going to say, how are you implementing things in practice?
Yeah, so we work with a number of FTSE organisations at the moment, and the focus is really, as sort of Matt said, really around the supply chain and looking at how to instill the principles at a very grassroots level. So actually, when you start to get into that at a board level, the implications are quite profound, because it means changing the assessment framework for who you work with. And, the new norm now is organisations that are adhering to and are leaders in these principles in a practical sense are going to be looked at differently within the supply chain. So that's one area that's very, very important. The other side of it is also working practically from a governance perspective, so that there is the accountability and check and balance on all of these decisions, and that is something at a board governance level, and then through the organisation as to how that information is shared back through that set of organisations. So that's quite a cultural piece that a number of boards are now interested in.
Well, thank you for that. I just want to go back to employees for a minute. How much comes from the bottom up? I mean, we've talked already about this. Employees and children, are they shaping the future as well as C-suite down? Are you getting pressure, good pressure from bottom up?
Yeah, I would say so. The sort of the younger generation, the millennials who are now in the workplace, they're the ones who really probably are genuinely pushing for this to happen. I've been working for 26, 27 years, and it wasn't a thing 20 years ago. It wasn't a thing 10 years ago. This is something which has really happened in obviously the last few years. And the last two companies I've worked at, it's been something that's actually been really important to the graduates, the new joiners within the organisation. They want to see this happening. They don't want us to see us just spending stuff willy-nilly, massive carbon footprint, etc., etc. So they care. There's an environmental impact that they care about.
I think they really do. I remember being at the BBC and they abolished waste paper bins. We had to recycle or not use paper. I've still got bits of paper and get into trouble for it. But do you find the same, Dax, that you get pressure from below?
I get inspiration from below.
That's a much better word.
Inspiration, because the mindset of the next generation is so open. It's very much an abundance culture, and they're looking at things in different ways. So I love to learn from that sort of experience, but also they're very fact-based, because they will go online, they will go and discover what the facts are, what the data is, and they will come back with actually points of data that suddenly enlighten you. And then you kind of go, actually, these actions we were taking before, they actually aren't a good thing for the environment, so we need to change. And the way they bring that awareness through is very, very strong in society today. So the more that we can encourage that, I believe that's only a force for good.
So we can learn from them and get inspired by them. Is it the same with you, Matt? I'm sure it is. All the space-age kids.
I would say yes, but very much, it's a bottom-up inspiration. I think the only difference is a lot of people talk about millennials and Gen Z as being ones that are doing it. I'm happy to say that it's a lot of baby boomers and Gen X. Because obviously usually there's a lot older staff, because obviously space does take, it's a longer burn on your career before you see the outcomes of all your work and all the fruition. Doesn't mean millennials and Gen Zs don't have an active role in it, but what blew me away when I joined was how many baby boomers and Gen Xs were passionate about making a difference. Because we've been pulling the satellite data now for over a decade, and we've seen what we've been doing to the Earth, and it's horrific. So I'm glad that every person within the organisation is quite inspiring when you get a chance to sit down and talk to them about it. And the passion is obviously not just about space; it's about the Earth and making the best of the Earth.
Well, thank you for that. That's very inspiring. Can I ask you all, what is a priority in terms of sustainability for 2023?
For me, I'd like to see more governance. I'd like to see sort of more standardization, something that we can adopt and follow. It would be great if we could aspire to a new ISO standard around, sustainability, and actually be sort of called out for it and make sure that we're actually doing it. And someone comes along and actually says, no, you really are. This is, you're achieving what you've set out to do, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think there's enough, real governance out there. I think there's different levels of sustainability in organisations today. Some aren't even doing anything about it at all. So I just would love to start seeing some sort of level of governance starting to be thought of or talked about properly.
So more regulations, so you've got benchmarks and so on.
Correct. Yeah, things to aspire to.
Yes, good. Dax, what about you? What would you wish for 2023?
Well, certainly regulation, absolutely. And it's a combination. So for me, what I'm seeing at the board table now is a trend of the environmental net zero, but making that very practical and making that very much an in-year commitment. There's also the benefit, and we've talked about different generational thought process coming together, but actually the inclusion, I know we talk about diversity, but the inclusion agenda, and that's not only from a gender perspective or a social mobility perspective, but actually how do we combine the views in society to get the best ideas in order to implement? I do believe that's key. And the final part I would say is being very distinct in the brainstorming side of all of these things, and being very clear in the, we decide and then we deliver. So having that self-disciplined approach and the balance in terms of the societal systems that sit around that, I do believe that will drive real traction on the ground with real results that we can talk about that have impact to the world.
Thank you. And Matt, your hopes for 2023, you're going to zap all that debris in the sky. Love that.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, I think it'll take me longer than 2023 to capture all of it. But certainly, by 2030, I hopefully we would have reduced that footprint quite a lot. I like Giles's ISO standards. Over the last couple of years, we've built a tech carbon impact wiki that's also on LinkedIn, as well as Wikipedia, where we've tried to put in models and standards. And what I'd really like to see is those standards being used or improved upon to actually create a standard that all big companies and consumers use, so that we can start rating these companies, and especially the big names that we all know, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. I'd like them to all be transparent and grade their data so that we can measure it accurately, instead of having to be a rocket scientist to understand what they're actually producing, because a couple of them are very vague in the way it's produced. I'd like to see promotion of the supply chain where the third parties are actually leveraging renewable energy already, and penalising those that don't use renewable energy. Those are the sort of things that I wish for. My actual own priority is working and looking at investigating moving forward for data centres in space. Data centres are a massive carbon out, but all we've done is we're drawing it all together so that we can see it better. Now that we can see the real picture of how much carbon emissions are created by managing and creating data centres, if we can move those into space, we're going to take away a lot of the challenges that we have now.
Oh, that's so interesting. Moving data centres around. Has anybody got a net zero target in their business? I know it's easy for politicians to say it'll all be fine by, Do you have a target internally? You do, Dax.
I mean, for us, it's very straightforward. We're not a large organisation, so we do have that policy in place. But also, we are working with lots of different shapes and sizes of organisation, and we are seeing much more of a move to active commitment and breaking down those goals into very, very precise segments. So both individually within the firm that I look after, but also across the Forbes Technology Council, and more broadly, that shift is definitely happening.
Good. So measurable things. Giles, you don't have a net zero.
No, I don't necessarily think there is a necessary. I think it's something we want to aspire to, absolutely. But I don't think it's something in the company mission or vision that's part of it at the moment. But perhaps that's actually something that should change. But we are trying to do our part. It is part of the social mission of the organisation. So we get our reminders every week to do any carbon footprint tracking that we need to, and everybody plays their part in doing so.
Thank you. And Matt, do you have any net zero? I mean, you're in such a different business, really. I don't know that you can say that, really, can you?
I think because we are still part of government. We're part of the agenda to obviously address this by 2030. I think we have more of a social mission to educate our supply chain and our investors to try to buy into that commitment with us jointly, so that we can have that fourfold impact. And that's kind of where personally I keep trying to drive it, and I know the rest of the board do as well.
Well, I think you're all I think everybody agrees that it's a good thing. Everyone's conscious of sustainability, but you're all trying to do things in terms of supply chains, including everybody, taking advantage of baby boomers as well as Gen Z. And you all would like to see a bit more governance and regulation. But thank you all very much. Very interesting to hear what you're all doing about sustainability. And thanks for joining us from afar, Matt. We think you're out of space somewhere.
No, I wish, but I haven't got my ticket yet.